Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to National Geographic Traveller's Travel Geeks event. My name is Farida Zainalova, and I'm one of the contributing editors here at the magazine, and I'm going to be your moderator for this evening. Now, as you're all aware, we are here to talk about how to plan your ultimate trip to Kenya. But before we do that, and before I introduce you to our wonderful panel of experts, I just want to run through a couple of housekeeping things with you guys. Now, for those of you who have never attended one of our Travel Geeks events before, they're very lively and chatty, and they tend to last about an hour. What's going to happen is for the next 40 to 45 minutes or so, I'm going to quiz our panel on all things Kenya, from where to go and what to do and everything in between. And towards the end, you guys will have the opportunity to put some of your questions to the panel. How do you do that? Well, by using the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom window. Not the chat window, but the Q&A section. And as and when you think of something, just pop it in there and I will try and get through as many of those as I can towards the end of the session. Now, while I'm talking to our experts, please feel free to chat amongst yourselves in the chat window, just slightly to the right of the screen. Perhaps you are planning your very first trip to Kenya, or you've been several times and you are keen to share some of your tips and recommendations in the chat. And we also have a couple of members from the editorial team here at NGT lingering in the chat function, and they'll be on hand to answer any questions that you guys might have. They'll also be posting past and present Kenya content that we've worked on, and I'm sure some of Emma's pieces will appear in there as well. They'll be posting some of those so you can click on those and read them a little bit later on. Now, nobody came here to listen to me talk. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our wonderful panel. First up, we have Sarah Marshall. Hi, Sarah. Sarah is a freelance journalist and occasional photographer. She is passionate about Africa and visits the continent several times a year. Alongside her travel writing, she works with the charity Tusk Trust to profile and photograph finalists for its annual conservation awards. Earlier this year, Sarah spent 2 months traveling around Kenya as part of a 6-month stint in Africa, and she considers Kenya as one of her favorite places in the entire world. Thank you for being here tonight, Sarah. It's good to have you.
It's great to be here.
Lovely. Next up, we have Emma. Hi, Emma. Emma Gregg is a multi-award-winning travel journalist, guidebook author, photographer, and Africa expert. She writes about nature, culture, and conservation, both close to home and in some of the wildest places in the world. She's passionate about responsible, sustainable approaches to travel, and she's been a contributor to National Geographic Traveller since the very first edition over 10 years ago. Hi, Emma. It's lovely to have you here.
Oh, it's so nice to be here.
Next up, we have Greg Fennell. Greg is a fellow, hi Greg, sorry, wave. Greg is a Royal Geographical Society, is a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. He is an award-winning travel and adventure photographer who's worked across the globe for a number of high-end publications on both editorial and commercial projects for the past 15 years. And I'm really looking forward to picking his brain about what makes the perfect photo when we're all traveling around Kenya. Last but not least, we have Grace Maina. Grace has worked for the Kenya Tourism Board for 11 years. As their regional marketing manager, she promotes Kenya's experiences and is thoroughly versed in all the wonderful things that the country has to offer. She's a passionate hiker and loves to travel all around the country. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Grace. Now, welcome to all of our experts. I have so many questions to get through, so I'm going to dive in, and this one goes out to all of you. What does Kenya mean to you? Can you tell me a little bit about your personal relationship with the country? Grace, let's start with you.
Thank you, Farida. I feel like I'm cheating. I'm a Kenyan. So, I mean, being a Kenyan means everything to me. And I love our country, first of all. And I believe that we truly are magical in what we offer. in terms of our experiences, in terms of the people, places for you to come and see. And I believe we are open for visitors. And this is one of the key selling points for Kenya in terms of welcoming people. So here we are, I'm a Kenyan and I'm proud to be one representing Magical Kenya. Thank you.
What a fantastic answer. Emma, how about you? I feel like the continent in general is like your second home, but in particular Kenya, what does it mean to you?
I mean, it's very special. We go back quite a way because my first ever safari, and I've been lucky enough to go on safari many times, but my first ever proper safari was a trip to Kenya, and it was way back in the 90s, and my partner at the time and I hired a little four-wheel drive, and off we went, the two of us, zooming across this incredible country all the way from the coast to the Masai Mara, and I'll never forget it, and it really got me totally hooked. And yeah, it's really, every time I go back I find something new. It's an incredibly complex and very interesting country that's got just so much to offer. There's just so many good things to say about it.
Absolutely, and we're going to be talking about all of those good things in depth very shortly. Sarah, how about you? What does Kenya mean to you?
Well, I'm a bit like Emma in that it was my first safari, and I think that always sticks with you. And it was just so incredible to see all this amazing wildlife, stuff that I'd only ever seen on documentaries, that kind of animal behavior and being so close to it all around me. And I got that bug and really wanted to go back. And I think ever since I've been returning, I keep finding new things about the country that I love. And you know, the people are fabulous and fantastic and so varied as well, and different traditions, different cultures. And this time I actually went to the coast and spent some time there, and it's an absolutely fabulous coastline. And I'm so guilty of having overlooked that before and just diving straight into the wildlife on land, but actually there's just so much more to see there. So yeah, and there's more for me to discover. So I'm looking forward to learning more from everyone on the panel tonight as well.
Absolutely, excellent. And Greg, how about you?
I mean, I'm very similar to the others in the sense that the kind of Kenya opened the door to me to safaris and having that access to amazing wildlife. There's something, I guess, quite sensory about the place that's always got to me in general with Africa, but East Africa especially, kind of the smells, the sounds, the feeling when you arrive, and even down to like the color of the soil that gets stuck in your clothes and you can never get it out. It's a cliche, but it gets under your skin and
absolutely
just draws you back.
Oh, I've gone purple. Oh, but you know what? It's just going to add to the fun, isn't it? Maybe I'll go back to a normal color soon. Thank you so much, Greg. That's an excellent answer. I don't know why I'm purple, but let's move on. We probably have a lot of people on the panel who have never been to Kenya and they're thinking about their first trip, and they might find it quite overwhelming because it's so vast and there's just so much to offer. For someone who hasn't been before, where do they start? What are the absolute must-sees for a first-time visitor? Emma, let's start with you.
Well, you know, I think if you're going for the very first time, then there are two key things that you really want to try and include in your trip, because this is what Kenya is so great at. And Sarah alluded to this really nicely. The fact that it's got a beautiful Indian Ocean coastline, and it's also got amazing wildlife experiences and outdoor adventures. So so whatever you do, don't just focus on one or the other. Do your very best to combine the two. And the best order generally, I would say, is to think of the outdoor adventure first. So whether that's a safari experience or a hiking experience, or maybe a mountain experience if you head for Mount Kenya, do that really tough, rugged experience first, and treat yourself to some real wonderful downtime on the Indian Ocean. I mean, it's a classic bush and beach destination, and it's just such a fabulous combination. So yeah, those are the key elements, but I mean, there's just so much more detail that we're going to get into later, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Does anyone else want to contribute to that? Sarah, what would you suggest to a first timer who doesn't know where to start?
Well, I think if wildlife's your interest, then I have to say the Masai Mara. I mean, I'm always drawn back there again and again. And I know that's really obvious, but it just is so fantastic. But one thing I would say is that, you know, the Masai Mara it's a huge area, and there are lots of different conservancies and different parts of the Mara that you can visit. And it's worth really doing some research into that. Obviously, if you're staying in one of the conservancies, you are having a bit more of an exclusive experience, in that the number of vehicles that's is limited in that conservancy to the lodges that are and people are staying at the lodges there. And also you're paying money towards conservation and communities, because that land is leased from the Maasai community. So that's something to think about. The Mara Reserve is obviously fantastic. You'll get to see the wildebeest crossings there. So do your research even in that small sort of pocket of area, and think about what it is you want to get from a safari.
Absolutely, that's a really good answer. And Grace, how about you? What maybe 2 or 3 things would you recommend for a first timer?
I think I'd pretty much go with what Emma and Sarah have mentioned. The first thing that you must have is the wildlife, because I think we believe we are the home for the classic safari, the original safari, the way it was meant to be, what we call quintessential safari. But then what you do when you're on that safari, you may want to diversify a bit and do your walking safari, do a balloon safari, horse riding safari. So there are many ways you can experience the wildlife without necessarily being in a Land Cruiser. So that would be really my advice. And the things you get to do when you're on the safari is what really counts. When you are at the coast, again, it's the things you immerse yourself into. The coast has a lot to offer in terms of food, culture, Swahili rich culture, and the things that you can do in the ocean sports. So really, those are must-dos when you come as a first timer.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg, is there anything you want to add to that?
I guess for a lot of people, it kind of depends on.
Can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
You're back. Yeah.
For a lot of people, I guess it depends on their budget and what they want to try and stretch to or not. And I think somewhere like Kenya is worth, it's the type of trip that you might only get to do once or twice in a life for some people, if they are lucky enough to even go once. And so it's definitely worth kind of planning it properly and considering where you're staying and what impact that has. Try and find places that have the right kind of ethical standpoint that aligns with what you do, and really consider, I guess, if you're going to be flying that far, especially as we've all had a year, 2 years nearly of not really traveling that much, it's kind of made us really appreciate what travel means. And I think if you are going to travel to somewhere like Kenya, then really kind of treat travel as a kind of special experience and something that needs to be planned and look forward to and excited, rather than some throwaway kind of trip.
Absolutely. And we're going to touch on the ethical side of things a little bit more later on. Now, almost all of you talked about wildlife being one of the biggest draws about Kenya. Kenya is home to 45 national parks. So tell me, what are some of your favorite places for exploring its abundant wildlife? If you had to pick a handful of places. Sarah, let's start with you this time.
Well, I talked about the Mara, so I shouldn't really go on about that, but that is obviously one of my favorite places. I really love the Samburu area as well. And when you talk about different cultures, there is perhaps a little less focus just on wildlife, but the culture there is fascinating. And if you really want to learn about Kenyan people, and it's your sort of first time, that would be a great place to go. The landscapes are beautiful there. And I've been a few times now, and on each occasion, I sort of find something new to get excited about. And is also, there are some great examples of community ecotourism as well. There's a fantastic elephant sanctuary there called Reteti that's owned and run by the community. A really great place to visit. So that would be one area. We talked about the coast before. I really enjoyed Lamu. I know it's a very trendy place now and everybody's going there, but Grace mentioned before about Swahili culture, and it's that's a really fantastic place to see that. The architecture, I mean, you've got donkeys still going through sandy streets, calls to prayer echoing through open buildings. It's a real sensory overload. So that was a new place for me this year that I discovered, and I really enjoyed it. So definitely there. For conservation, Lewa and Barana, fantastic. You can do a real sort of behind the scenes look at how conservation works, going into their operations center at Lewa, seeing how all the anti-poaching work functions. So different aspects of sort of wildlife culture I found really fascinating in those places.
Absolutely, that sounds incredible. Grace, how about you? Where are some of you know Kenya like the back of your hand, so where are some of your favorite places for exploring the wildlife?
I'm spoiled for choice, actually, so I don't know where to start with, but I would start with what Sarah has said. Top of my list is Samburu. I love Samburu. It's got very, very unique scenery, and the five special animals you can't see anywhere else in Kenya. That's pretty nice. The weather is warm and hot. I also love Mount Kenya region, where you get to actually do the actual hiking and get to see the grazers, the antelopes, the small animals. It's pretty nice, and it gives you both your adventure and wildlife sceneries. I love the Savo East and the Savo West, quite sprawling, quite huge, with a lot of elephants. And the beauty is when you're in the Savo, you get to experience you get to see a bit of you get to see Mount Kilimanjaro, the tip of it, and you get to experience a bit of the hot weather, and you can always combine the wildlife with going down to the coast. So all these parks and KWS parks, and of course right here in Nairobi, where if you have a weekend that you need to do something, you can always go to the national park where you get to see the wild animals, and you spend a whole day, and it's only a few kilometers away from the city center. So there's pretty much you can do. And of course, not to forget Masai Mara, a great time to come for migration. But then again, it's a whole year experience. You don't have to come for the migration alone. Every time of the year is a good time to be at the Mara. You never get tired of the Mara. So really, I think the 45 national parks and there are over 100 conservancies offer a lot of wildlife for everyone to enjoy. Yeah, absolutely.
I completely agree with you. I feel like I could go back to the Mara like 4, 5, 6, 7 times, even more. It was incredible. And how about you? Where are some of your favorite places for wildlife?
Oh goodness, well, Sarah and Grace have already picked off some absolutely brilliant ones. I have to say, I mean, the Mara was my very first love when it came to safari experiences, and so many of those scenes and sequences that we've all seen on nature documentaries, they really are true. They really do play out in that amazing grassland environment. It's just fascinating to see, and there are different ways to see it. You know, there are ways you can see it depending on the budget you have and the level of involvement you'd like to have. You know, whether you would like, as the others have mentioned, to get really involved in the nitty-gritty of what goes on behind the scenes conservation wise, or whether you'd like an experience which is more personal to you, if you like. You're just making your own discoveries without assistance. You can self-drive into that region and just kind of work things out for yourself, which is fabulous as well. Anyway, but apart from that, you know, amazing blockbuster of a spot, I also really enjoy the littler places. You know, I'm a great one for seeking out patches of trees that you can actually walk through. I love forest scenery and forest wildlife and birds in particular. And there's a wonderful little forest which is protected called the Kakamega Forest, which is also on the west side of the country, like the Mara is. That's a really, really beautiful place that not that many people go to. So that's kind of a special little spot. And then I don't think we should forget marine wildlife as well. I mean, I'll do anything to go skiing or diving in the Indian Ocean. You know, you just ask me, I am there. And the Kenyan coast has got some really great spots. So yeah, I would say make time for that, whether you're going out by boat and just snorkeling, or whether you're setting off from the shore. There are quite a few different options to see what's going on the surface. So that can fit really nicely, I think, with a trip which has got, as I say at the beginning, a big focus on the amazing stuff that goes on inland. And yeah, when you allow yourself time to stretch out on the beach, then it makes sense to see what's under the surface there as well, I think.
Absolutely, that's a great answer. Greg, from a photographer's point of view, in terms of shooting wildlife, particularly shooting wildlife in Kenya, what makes a great image, and how do you go about getting that kind of, you know, that spread, like that really kind of impactful image?
The $1 million question. I mean, I think it's interesting because, you know, having worked there as a professional photographer on assignment, I've quite often turned up to a spot and found a tourist with an even bigger camera and bigger lens than I've brought with me, or probably even own. And I think in photography, there is always a sense of, you know, getting close to the animal with, you know, a big long lens, especially when you're trying to photograph the big five. But I personally prefer something that has a bit more kind of energy and asks maybe more kind of complicated questions. But then it's each to their own, you know. For me personally, I love the drama that you can get in these little encounters, and how you actually try and find a way to communicate that in an image, you know. Right. It can be tricky, but if you can kind of get that across in an image, whether or not it be, you know, shot at dusk and there's a bit of motion blur in it, you know, not everything needs to be pin sharp and perfect. You need to get an element of emotion across in a picture, I think. And that's where a lot of people maybe fall down, because they tend to go for the obvious. And I think you sometimes need to look the other way.
Okay. If I'm not mistaken, we might be able to show some of your photographs, but what is your favorite photo that you've taken in Kenya? If you had to pick one.
Difficult.
We can try and find it.
I mean,
post a link.
Because the thing is, what's so beautiful about photography is that the pictures become kind of connected to your memories of a place. Absolutely. And so a picture that I might not think is a particularly strong photograph actually holds dearest to me because of the memory that it reminds me of. Absolutely. And, you know, that's the other thing that needs to be remembered. At the end of the day, when you go to these places, there's, you know, who says something's a good or a bad photo? If it means something to you, then that's important, and that's the main thing. And I think that's what everyone should remember when they go, you know, try and capture things that really mean something to them personally, rather than, you know, a generic photo. So yeah, for me, I mean, I was very lucky. In the last time I visited Kenya, I walked in the Northern Conservancies, and from a photography point of view, doing a walking safari is quite tricky, because you're never going to get that. You're never going to be able to sneak up on the animals that quickly or easily. You know, we stumbled across a bull elephant in Musk and spent probably about an hour and a half evading it and trying to observe, but not getting close, and making sure we stayed, you know, downwind and all of those things. So actually, from a photography point of view, it wasn't very fruitful, but from an life experience point of view, is the most amazing thing I've, you know, done in Kenya.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer. My next question, Emma, I'm going to direct to you, because you touched on this a little bit in your last answer in terms of getting around. You mentioned doing a self-drive, but again, for someone who may not have been there before, what is the best way to get around? Is hiring a car and doing a mammoth trip of the entire country the best way to explore the country, or perhaps to kind of take part in a guided safari? What's it like getting around the country? Emma, let's start with you.
Well, as for what's the best thing to do, well, I mean, goodness, it's so personal, because there are lots of different options, and it really depends on your level of experience, what you enjoy, what you're looking for. My very first safari way back then was I say just the two of us in this little hire car. We didn't even have a guide. and we managed. It was fun. It was an adventure. We found our own way, and that was fantastic. I have a lot of very vivid memories of that. A lot of them to do with getting lost, and you know what that entails, and how you found your way out again. And when it comes to wildlife watching, the process of finding your own wildlife on your own, it just feels like such a triumph. It's a real thrill. However, it has to be said that if you were to hire a vehicle and a guide, which in the grand scheme of things doesn't cost all that much more, you get the benefit of having somebody else behind the wheel. So that obviously takes a lot of the strain off you when it comes to navigation and mechanics, all that kind of stuff. And you get to tap into the wealth of knowledge and experience that Kenya's safari driver guides always have. They're almost all brilliant and very, very chatty, and they love sharing their knowledge and their stories, and that really adds a very special flavor to a trip. So that's option 2. You know, hire a vehicle and hire a driver guide with it. And then, of course, the option that most of us think about first, perhaps, is the standard guided safari, and Kenya is brilliant at this. There are lots of different options and lots of different budgets, different sorts of vehicles, different sorts of itineraries. So again, I mean, we could talk for the whole session about just what sort of options there are and how to choose them. And then, of course, there are safaris and journeys which use public transport. This is a challenge, but doable, and it's a way to really get to know a little bit more about what daily life in Kenya is like. And if meeting people and having conversations with people in depth, people that you never would encounter in any other way, if that appeals to you, then this is a wonderful option. And then finally, if you're really short of time and can afford it, you can, of course, bounce around the country by light plane or even by helicopter. Now, I mean, I have to say, this is obviously not a climate-friendly choice, but it's a choice if you want to move fast, and you may decide to make that choice if you have a really coherent, well thought out plan to compensate for the carbon emissions that this plan entails. So there are lots of different ways of doing that. There are lots of huge benefits to ecotourism, and that ecotourism can bring in a country like Kenya. So you know, there are definitely ways of making a carbon heavy trip valuable, both to the community in Kenya and also to the ecosystems that Kenya preserves. So yeah, it's really horses for courses. It's just so I couldn't say this is the best, because they're all different depending on your interests.
Goodness me, I feel like you've covered all grounds there. Is there anything that any of the other experts would like to add in terms of traveling around the country? Thank you for that, Emma. Anything else anyone wants to add?
I think
yes, great.
Emma, thank you. You've covered it very well. I think that really sums it up. You could either get a guide or do a self-drive, but all the options she's given are pretty good options to consider. And then, of course, it depends on your budget and how you want to, you know, where you want to go. Yeah.
Speaking of guides, before I forget, I just want to give a shout out to my guide. His name was Joseph at Sanctuary Olanana, and he made my trip a magical one. He was fantastic, and I think had I done that by myself, I wouldn't have had the same experience. And I think, yeah, if you can, getting a guide is incredibly helpful. I'm going to dip in and out of practical questions, but I'm going to go back to what Kenya has to offer. Now, we've talked about Masai Mara quite a bit, and rightly so, it deserves to be spoken about. But what I want to know is, away from the most famous sites, what about the little secret places, the lesser known destinations of Kenya? What are some? Grace, let's start with you. . What's your favorite place that not many of us may have heard of?
There are quite several, and again, it depends on what your interests are, what you want to see, what your experiences, what you want to experience. But I'll start off with the northern part of the country. I believe that's a part of our country that is not very well ventured into in terms of seeing things like the Lake Desert, Lake Turkana, which is in the heart, in the further up neighboring Lake Ethiopia, like Ethiopia. We've got places like Kakamega Forest. I believe Emma mentioned about it. It's a rainforest with a lot to offer in terms of birding, especially for people who are interested in bird watching. We've got islands of the Lake Victoria. These are places that are not really spoken much about, but they have a lot to offer in terms of flora and fauna and also birds. And also we've got golf courses, we've got sports tourism, which is really special. And I mean, like even with people moving more and more towards being aware of being fit, we've got the highlands, the high altitude training areas where athletes train. And these are places that you come and see and actually experience the weather that they practice under. So they're pretty much little hidden gems, what we call hidden gems of Kenya, that are tucked away in places. And what we've done as an organization is that we've put together what we call Magical Kenya signature experiences collections, where we've got a listed number of unique curated experiences where you just come and immerse yourself way and above the wildlife and what the usual experiences are. So these are listed on our Magical Kenya website, where you can actually Google and just, pick out on what you want to come and experience. But they are pretty much, and I think by now we've got about over 44 collections of unique curated experiences, and that takes you across the entire country. Absolutely.
Yes, we'll post the link to the Kenya website so our audience can go and find out a little bit more about that. Sarah, let's go to you. If you had to pick one, maybe two places that that are so unique and unheard of, you almost don't want to share your experience, where would they be?
Well, a couple of years ago, there was a place I went to called Shompole Conservancy, and it's an area of land. It forms a corridor between Amboseli and the Mara, so it's a really important travelling route for elephants. But it also, from a community point of view, it's fascinating. It's all communally owned land, so you still get a lot of the Maasai living nomadically. It's a very dry, dusty area, so maybe not to everybody's liking, but really fascinating and photographically as well, really beautiful. The sort of wildlife you get there, you'll get lions, you'll get caracals occasionally there as well. And there's an alkaline lake called Magadi where you have the flamingos that come in. So it felt to me a very, a bit more off the beaten track, a really beautiful area that I would definitely love to go back to.
Okay, fantastic. Emma, how about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I mentioned Kakamega Forest before. Oh, it's just lovely, it really is. And like I say, the bird life there is superb. Another place I like was just a little bit well known, but with very good reason. It's a place called Loisaba. The reason that really stands out for me as an incredibly happy memory is that they, in that particular conservancy, that it's possible to sleep out on a platform, which is completely open to the stars. It's just you under a frame with the mosquito net over it, and that's very magical. There's a growing number of places in Kenya now where you can sleep out in a sort of safe way, and this is one of the best ones. There's also a really, really beautiful, incredibly beautiful treehouse sleep out in the Masai Mara, owned by Alex Walker-Serian. So I think those sort of places are like hidden places within better known places. I really like those for sure.
Absolutely. Greg, is there anything you wanted to add? Perhaps somewhere that you've been that you think is really kind of...
Well, I was very fortunate to go to Angama Mara when that first kind of opened, and that was set up by Steve and Nikki Fitzgerald, and it's right up on the, I'm not going to be able to say this right, but the Ilulolo Escarpment, kind of right on the edge of the Mara Triangle. You're going to have to correct me, Grace, on that, but it has these insane views. Literally, it's almost like you sit in a bird's nest. That's the only way I can describe it. You feel like you are on top of a mountain looking down across the whole of the plains beneath you. And they've done it very tastefully, and it's a beautiful place to stay. It seems, you know, that they've done it very sustainably as well, in terms of how it works within the local community. And for me, there's a spot that you could go to, which is the exact spot in the poster of Out of Africa that they had, the famous shot of the picnic. And it's the same hill that they actually filmed on. It's not far from there, which is quite nice if you're a bit of a film buff. But just a truly magical place. Honestly,
Incredible.
the views are breathtaking, and you can sit there and have your breakfast and look at this in the morning and think about and plot where you're going to go on your game drive later in the day.
Absolutely, that sounds incredible. I have to move on to a question about the Great Wildebeest Migration, because quite a few people in the chat are talking about it. I might direct this one to you, Grace. When is the best time to go to Kenya to experience the Great Wildebeest Migration? Experienced it yourself?
Yeah. Given the seasonality that it happens, you know, at a given time of the year, for this year, it started mid-July and just ended towards mid of September. So the peak period to watch would be August. And this, I think, will be replicated also in 2022. It will be more or less about the same time. So that will be the best time to see the migration. I think towards September, towards the end of the year, they start going back. So you get to see a few of them. There will be some left. A few of them, you won't get to see them crossing the river, but there are a few left trickling down and going back to Serengeti. Yeah.
Excellent. That's really good to know. I want to talk about exploring local communities and making sure that while we do so, we're also giving back to those communities. Emma, conservation and ethical travel is your expertise. How do you ensure someone who goes to Kenya and does it in a meaningful and a helpful way to the local community?
Well, we've already talked a little bit about conservancies, and spending the bulk of your time in locally owned conservancies, that's a really good way of going about it. I mean, Kenya has got incredibly strong sustainable tourism credentials, and has done for a long time. The conservancy system is fantastic. It's a system whereby the ancestral land of rural communities that would otherwise be disadvantaged and would otherwise perhaps use the land for grazing. That land is instead given over to tourism. So the communities concerned allow tourism experts, whether it's a lodge company or a camping company, they give them a lease to use their land and to invite tourists to enjoy it. And the community themselves get the benefit, first of all, of earning money from the the lease contracts, and also that they're quite often enabled to earn money from tourism directly, either by getting jobs as guides or being trained in other tourism or hospitality roles, or selling products to the tourists that visit. This is all cool and very helpful. It's really good for communities, and it's really good for habitats, and it's really good for wildlife. It's a very good solution to the huge problem that many parts of rural Africa has, which is how to deal with the conflicts that arise between the interests of rural human communities and the interests of wildlife communities. So allowing rural communities to earn a decent, fair, dignified living from wildlife tourism is quite a good way of tackling this. So to find out about these places, the best thing to do is to find a travel agent that knows their stuff. And there are quite a few travel agents in this country and in Australia and in the States who specialize in Africa and have a wealth of knowledge about which conservancies are the most active, the most useful, the most beneficial. So they're other people to book through, and you know, of course, to chat to about it all. So yeah, there are some great options.
That's a great answer, and it's incredibly important one as well. Was there anything any of the other experts felt like Emma didn't cover that they'd like to add to in terms of traveling? Yeah, go on, Greg.
I was just going to say that the visit that I did on the Northern Conservancies, which is a walking safari with a guide, a local guide, and a guide that's worked throughout Africa in various countries as a safari guide, was excellent. That was run by Celia, so those are worth looking at. The bonus, I mean, you touched on this earlier, I believe, Emma, was with having a guide, is that the difference they bring in terms of local knowledge is amazing. And for me, that experience was so much enhanced by the kind of things that I was learning from the guide. And because we were on foot, you're able to observe things in a much slower, more methodical way, but equally you are kind of in amongst it all. The other end of the spectrum, there's a lady, Nella, who runs Tin Trunk Safari. I did a trip with her, which she will fly you from place to place in a small prop plane. She's a pilot, American pilot, and excellently kind of, you know, educated on the various things, and very well conducted, and will put together kind of bespoke packages for people. And again, very different experience, because you then kind of hop across the Mara, but from above, which is, again, fascinating because you really get a sense of the scale of the place.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a great answer. I have time to, I can't believe this is happening. I have time to squeeze in one more question from me before we open up the Q&A to the audience. And that's something we haven't really touched on so far, and that is the capital, Nairobi. If somebody is planning to fly into Nairobi and then drive on to elsewhere, how long should they spend in Nairobi, and what are some of the best attractions, perhaps art gallery? What should they do, and how long should they spend there? And this goes out to anyone. Perhaps Grace, we can start with you.
If someone comes in and they want to spend some time in Nairobi, it's very advisable to start off with what we have to offer in terms of wildlife, where you get to see it up close. And one of the best places to do this is to visit like the giraffe center, where you get to actually, you know, feed the giraffes quite straight up and close up, and you get to also learn what the giraffes are all about. You also can go to the Daphne Shedrake, where there's the elephant orphanage, which is quite something. You get to experience the little babies and the stories behind their rescue. And then you can adopt an elephant if you may. Then you get to see the national park if you still have time. But if that wildlife is too much for you, you've got to see the museums. We've got the museums, Kenya museums, where we have our heritage and cultural display. But then above all, you get to have quite some nightlife if you want to. I think Nairobi is rated as one of the most cosmopolitan, you know, city in the world, and you really have, you're spoiled for choice in terms of the restaurants, visiting galleries, and actually just having fun visiting the city tour, having a city tour, guided city tour, which is really interesting for someone who's just there for a day or two. I wouldn't say there's a recommended period you should be here, because again, it depends on your itinerary. But a day when you come in the morning and you have an afternoon and again tomorrow morning, then you can just do probably what we call 48 hours in Nairobi or 24 hours in Nairobi. That would be adequate.
Okay, fantastic. And in terms of finding a tour guide in the city, if they head over to the website, they can kind of look into that.
Yes, we have recommended. Yeah? We have a recommended place where you can find a guide. Yeah, associations. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Grace. I'm going to now ask a few questions from the audience, and this goes out to anyone who feels like they want to answer it. The first one is, what is a good add-on to a safari in Masai Mara, which is a direct flight or a drive from a reserve or Nairobi? Is there a beach destination that's a direct flight to London? Did that make sense?
Well, you could fly into Mombasa, but not direct flights. There are some airlines which are flying into Mombasa, but I don't believe Kenya Airways would bring you to Nairobi and they would take you all through to Mombasa. That would be an option, but it would not be a direct flight per se. Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
And somebody else wants to know, are there inland water locations which offer river/lake safaris? Anyone like to answer this one?
Inland.
Yes, go.
You asked for inland?
Inland water locations which offer river and lake safaris.
I would say yes, but we would need to confirm if they do this, because I know Sagana Adventures, they do whitewater rafting. Then you get to experience the river. You can actually also do a bungee jump from there. So they offer a holistic adventure sort of experience in the river. So that is one that I can recommend for someone who wants a river safari and combine with adventure.
Okay, and somebody wants to know. Oh, go on, Emma, go on.
Yeah, I would also just say that there are a few places where you can see water birds. So Lake Naivasha, Lake Bogoria, and Lake Victoria, and they're all really great places for bird watching, depending on the time of year and you know, what's going on weather-wise.
That kind of takes me on to my next question really, really nicely. Somebody asked, I'm an avid bird watcher. Is there any great hotspots for birds? Any more you'd recommend, Emma?
Oh, well, those, and I've already mentioned Kakamega, but the main wildlife areas like the Masai Mara, Lamboseli, like Savo, like Samburu, they all have amazing birds. You get migrants on both resident species and a huge variety of them. There's just lots of different food sources in those parks, because there's grassland and also areas of trees and water. So those kind of mixed habitats attract lots of different sorts of species. Some people just do nothing but birdwatch when they're in Kenya. That's their whole trip. They just move from location to location and ticking things off, or you know, whatever these crazy birdwatchers do. Yes, it's tremendously rich and varied, and it tends to be the case that people that are most interested in bird watching will plan their itinerary quite carefully in advance, because in order to make the most of it, you definitely want to go to quite a few different habitats.
Absolutely. Great answer. Somebody has asked about safety for female travellers. How safe is it to travel around the country by yourself as a solo female? Sarah, is this something that you have experience with?
I mean, personally, I've always felt safe. I've never really had any issues at all. I know historically people have always been quite nervous about staying in Nairobi, but I've never had any problems, and I've spent quite a bit of time there. But also traveling around between places, I found it very straightforward, people very helpful. And I was on my own most of the time. I mean, when I was in places, I was connecting with guides, but actually making my way through, absolutely fine. Getting Ubers around Nairobi, no problem. So yeah, I would say I felt really safe. I don't know, Emma, how you feel traveling on your own?
It's a long time since I've been, I mean, literally on my own, because all my recent trips, I've had a guide with me pretty much every single day. So yeah, I can't speak for people who are perhaps planning a solo backpacking trip or a solo self-drive trip. Yeah, so maybe Grace is a better one to talk about that.
What would you like to say on that?
I would say it's pretty safe, but what I'd advise anybody, just like if I was in London, I would equally take precautions as a solo traveler coming from Kenya. So I think, yeah, you'd have to be very aware of your environment, and it's pretty much safe, but again, you have to be cautious again where you're going, what time, because this is how we live nowadays. It's all over the world. That's the way it is. Yeah,
absolutely. Just like anywhere else. Yeah, I completely agree. My goodness, the questions from the audience are flooding in. Somebody else wants to know, can the panel recommend any books to read before visiting Kenya? Do you guys have any that come to mind?
I would say that the very best guidebook, and this is not just the author of mine, the very best guidebook to the country is the Rough Guide, I would say. There are others, but Richard Trello has been working on the Rough Guide to Kenya for many, many years, and he is an absolute Kenya-phile, and he knows it very well and is very involved in the country, and I trust him implicitly to recommend the best stuff. So that's a must, I would say.
Did anyone else want to add anything? Greg, you got?
I mean, I think the classics are kind of, everyone's always heard of Out of Africa by Karen Blix, and somebody wants a kind of historical context, at least within the kind of colonial era. White Mischief is quite an interesting book to read about kind of, Nairobi in the 20s and 30s, and it's a bit of an eye-opener in terms of how things were back then. It's quite kind of an embarrassing thing to read in a way, but it's interesting, and I think it's always good to have context, so yeah, that's and it's a whodunit effectively, so it's an interesting book to read.
What was the name of that book? Sorry, just could you repeat that?
White,
okay. Somebody in the chat, Christine, said that White Mischief is brilliant, so that's a great recommendation. And what else were you going to say?
I think any kind of historical novel. I mean, I'm really excited to see what the audience actually have to add in the chat, because I love kind of suggestions for books that are set where I'm traveling. For me, it's one of the greatest indulgences when I'm traveling is to be reading a novel based in the country I am visiting. So yeah, I'd actually say I'm going to see what they have to suggest.
Our editorial manager, Joe Fletcher Cross, said, I would highly recommend Unbowed by Wangari Maathai. And the audience are coming up with so many great suggestions, so do keep an eye out on that. I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple more, and this is one that I was actually wondering when I went to Masai Mara a couple of years ago, and that's, is it possible to overdo safaris for a first trip? With Mara, Naivasha, Hell's Gate, Nakuru and Amboseli being so close to each other, it's tempting to try and squeeze it all into one trip. But is that a bad idea? Would it be quite overwhelming to do that? And anyone can answer this one.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, and it's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, actually. The old-fashioned concept of safari is well, I mean, let's go back to basics. The word safari, it's a Swahili word. It means journey. Most of us involved in safari know this, and we always are conscious of the fact that a safari is supposed to be a process of moving from place to place and enjoying different environments. That's all very well. But what you lose by hopping from place to place is the chance to really bond with one region and the people that live and work there and the wildlife that dwells there as well. And tempting though it is, particularly if, as Greg mentioned right at the beginning, particularly if this is going to be a trip of a lifetime, you want to make it really special. It's really tempting to cram in lots of different places, but frankly, it is really glorious. It's a real privilege to spend a whole string of days rather than just a couple of days in one beautiful place. And you know what? If you're on safari and you do it this way, if you spend longer in one spot than most people do, the staff at the lodges that you'll be staying at, or lodge if it's just one, will love you for it. They love people to stay longer. They hate it when people leave, and so if people are coming in one day and leaving 2 days later or 3 days later, it's kind of heartbreaking. But if you stay for a whole week, they become your very best friends for that week. You really get to know them properly. It's just a lovely experience. So I'm really interested in the idea of unhooking this concept that safari has to be a journey, moving from place to place. You can just choose one really good place and really enjoy it, and wow, I mean, that's amazing if you can restrain yourself in that way.
I agree with you, Emma. I think that's, for me personally, getting to know one place and getting to know it really well is the best approach. Sarah, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
I was going to say I agree with Emma, and I think also from a wildlife perspective, because what I really enjoy doing is getting to an area understanding the wildlife that's there and what's happening. And when you're going out on game drives, you might be tracking a cheetah, or you might be tracking a pride of lions that are hunting, and you need to give yourself a few days to see what happens. And that's when those really fascinating stories take place, those sort of those episodes that you would see on documentaries, when you get to see the real animal behavior. And you can't rush that. You've got to be in that same place for that amount of time. So for me, I much prefer spending a decent chunk.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple more before I have to wrap up. Somebody wants to know, is there much difference between the different conservancies? Grace, maybe this one should go out to you first.
There are differences in terms of what you get to experience, because what you get to see in Borana or Lewa Conservancy is very different. Somewhere like Old Pajeta will have the conservation of rhinos going on. So yes, the conservancies have something different to offer in terms of even the scenery, what you get to experience. The ones in the Mara will pretty much be more or less the same, of course, because they're in the Mara, but then it's the experiences that they offer when you're there and how they do their game drives, how they treat you as a visitor. So I would say every conservancy is special in its own way, in the way they offer the experience that you go to experience there. So pretty much it depends on what the conservancy has to offer.
Okay,
yeah.
Fantastic. And the last question of the night is a Kenyan safari a great idea for families? Is it something that people of all ages can enjoy? And what should they kind of bear in mind before they head out to a Kenyan safari as a family? Is there anyone that would like to answer this one?
Well, I don't have any children, but while I was traveling, I did bump into a family. This was in the pandemic, a couple who were traveling with their 2-year-old daughter, taking the opportunity to go and visit a lot of the camps when they weren't busy. I mean, she was probably a little too young for some of the camps, so you have to pick very carefully. But a couple of the places they absolutely loved, well, they were in the Mara, were Cotter's 1920s and House in the Wild, and both of those are geared towards families. So I think if you can find a property where there's a real focus on engaging children and being patient with families, then it's a fantastic experience. And I think for the parents too, they were saying they had a real opportunity to bond together and enjoy all these experiences. So I think it's a great idea.
What I want to add on to that probably is you have to be on the lookout on some lodges, probably in the Mara or far out there in the wild, that will not recommend a certain age. They'll probably say we will not have children less than 6 years. And this is because, first of all, it's safety first for the children, and also the fact that it's way out there in the wild, and children are quite sensitive. So there are some that will specifically say there's a certain age that is welcome to the lodge. Yeah.
And another thing that people have to bear in mind as well, if they're taking young kids, is the fact that some parts of Kenya at some times of year are malarial. So it's very important to consider that and consult your GP about what the best plan is health-wise. But I agree with Sarah. Kenya can be the most amazing, the most exciting classroom for little kids. Their eyes just pop out at the things that they see, and if they are old enough, if they're just old enough to remember, and they'll never forget what they see. And if they're that age when they like asking questions, well, you're not going to shut them up, because they're going to have tons and tons and tons of things to ask. And that's a wonderful way to develop a kid's interest in nature and in the environment for life.
Absolutely. Greg, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I 100% agree with what Emma said. I think, a trip to somewhere in Kenya, safari, would be such a monumental point of in somebody's life. If they're that young as a child, I think it would be an amazing thing to do. And around the age of kind of 8, 9 up, when you really start to kind of develop and be able to kind of understand the world a bit and remember it for a start, because I think if you go too young, you might not remember it that well. And just learning, I think it would have such an impact on their lives. And it's fantastic, really, what a difference it can make visiting these places and having a greater respect and understanding for just nature and, you know, climate change and all of these things, which are going to be things that affect their future far more than it will affect ours. It's still going to affect ours, but they are the future. And I think that the more that young people could be educated and get to see this kind of stuff for themselves, the more passionate they're going to be about wanting to protect it in the future.
Well said. Yeah, absolutely. I'm so sorry to say that that's all we have time for today. I could talk to you guys for another hour, but I'm afraid I do have to wrap up now. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for their expertise, and thank you to our sponsor, the Kenya Tourism Board. Before you guys all run away, I just want to tell you very quickly about a couple of the other Travel Geeks events that we have coming up. On the 12th of October, we have Travel Geeks Estonia. Tickets for that are on sale and tickets are free, so do head over to the website to grab yours. And the one after that is Travel Geeks Saskatchewan on the 23rd of November. Tickets for that aren't on sale yet, but do keep an eye out on the website and on our socials, and you'll be able to grab them as and when they are. Do join us for our National Geographic's Travellers First Meet the Adventurer Instagram live event that's taking place on Tuesday, 5th of October at 11:15, very specific time, when we'll be talking to Nepalese mountaineer Nims Persia about his challenges and adventures. And that's, like I said, over on our Instagram channel. The handle is NatGeoTravelUK. Now, last but not least, I swear, we also have a great subscription offer at the moment. If you're not subscribed to the magazine, you absolutely should be, because currently you can get hold of 3 issues of NGT for just £5 by using the code NGT5. And don't worry if you don't notice that, we'll send all of the details over to you. And guys, I'm afraid that is it all from me. Again, thank you so much to the panel and for everyone at home for joining in. We are going to leave you with a short video about National Geographic. I hope to see all of you at another event very soon. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.
This is not a border or a frame. It doesn't bind us or limit us. It is a portal, an entrance to the whole world, and a means to make it better. Every place, story, and passion lies through here. And for more than 130 years, this is where we explorers and innovators have gone. And going, it has been part of our mission to give back, reinvesting part of our profits into the future explorers and their passions. This portal is the threshold of the next chapter of humanity, where we don't just see the world, we change it. Come with us, and together, we'll go further.
Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and have so much to the panel. Good night.